So we'll start by giving a brief introduction of who we are and what we've been doing. And then I think it would be good if we all, I mean there's quite a few of us here, but I think it would be good if we do an introductory round together and talk a little bit about who you are, if you want to talk about what you study or what kind of political practice you've been involved in or not or whatever, or not anything at all is fine as well. And then we're going to go through some of the things that have been happening on campus here in the last year and try to put it in context with campus struggles in general since 2010, and try to build to a kind of collective critical analysis of what's been going on, what's gone well, what hasn't gone so well, before moving on to kind of more forward-facing section about how we would like to see universities develop or not, and what kind of collective political practice we can use to achieve those things. So my name's Vincent. I was at CCS last year doing the MA in Cultural Studies, and I'm currently working at the college in an administrative capacity, and I've been involved with Goldsmiths Solidarity Network for the last year, and before that it's kind of earlier instantiation, which was Goldsmiths Migrant Solidarity. So I'll say a little bit about how we kind of developed the group and what we were hoping to achieve with it. Essentially, Goldsmiths Solidarity Network is a kind of loose organizing initiative. It's kind of meant to be a place for people to meet and link different struggles on campus and off campus as well. It started out specifically as a migrant solidarity network, which was geared towards students facing visa problems, because at the autumn last year there was kind of an upsurge of UKBA presence on campuses, with a lot of fairly restrictive measures being implemented to kind of try to catch sort of bogus students that where the UKBA was claiming that people were coming on student visas and not studying. So there was a much stricter kind of control regime, and on top of that we also noticed that quite a few students actually at Goldsmiths were receiving bad information from the college, and then having to go back to their country of origin and basically not receiving the kind of support that we thought they should have. So we set up a group to kind of try to offer some advice, or at the very least support that for students in that situation, which in many ways was a good initiative. After a year of doing that, we kind of figured that maybe we should consider expanding this idea into other spheres as well. I mean, so that ideally what we wanted to do was to, on the one hand, have a network which could provide practical solidarity for students facing anything from employment issues, housing issues, trouble with lectures, academic grievances, and so on and so forth. And basically to have a group on campus that was committed to political struggle, but not on the basis of kind of a shared set of ideas or ideology or how people feel about what happened in 1917, but more about concrete issues that we're facing at the time. The other side of it was that we felt quite strongly that the social and organizational resources that Goldsmiths could potentially present for the area as a whole were not really being brought to bear in community struggles. So these were kind of the two main points of focus that we had. We wanted to kind of build up a culture of collective resistance on campus, and at the same time try to open up the campus a bit more to people from the surrounding area and involve students more in local struggles. Now, so this organizing model is based on something which was initially started up in Seattle, which is the Seattle Solidarity Network, which is basically what we have now, except on a community basis rather than a campus basis. And yeah, I think, Warren, would you like to talk a bit more about what we did end up doing in the last year?
Yeah, I'm Warren. I study arts and, well, I'm just completing my arts and politics MA in the politics department, and I've been involved in Goldsmiths Solidarity Network for the last year. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to kind of touch on some things that we've kind of been concentrating on the last year, for then us to, as a group, to kind of maybe use that as a basis to reflect on kind of whether these are effective or successful or appropriate kind of things for a group that, like Vincent claims, Vincent has outlined, we're kind of trying to be. So one of the main kind of actions we've been kind of most heavily kind of like focused on in the last year has been the industrial action surrounding staff pay. I'm sure most of you are aware of, and our kind of involvement has been about trying to kind of galvanise the student body into supporting the strike actions that kind of took place, and also simultaneously putting pressure on management to kind of relent in some way to the demands being made, and also try to kind of formulate a series of demands from the student's perspective, student body kind of perspective, and kind of present them to management. Also, try and tie that action, those strike actions, and that kind of pay dispute to a wider kind of conversation around kind of what sort of education we want, and students trying to galvanise students to see themselves as an important part in that kind of conversation, and obviously hoping to kind of encourage some sympathy towards staff, and then galvanise the students to kind of support the strike action and kind of further action. This kind of took a number of forms. One thing was about kind of getting information out there and kind of pushing back against the university's attempt to kind of dominate the narrative about the strike, and that was done through stalls and leaflet drops and fairly kind of typical and traditional attempts to get information out, and kind of maybe and Goldsmiths Solidarity Networks kind of heavily involved in the organisation and the undertaking of the occupation of Deptford Town Hall, which happened on the night before the second strike day, where up to 100 students occupied the main hall in Deptford Town Hall from late in the evening till early the following morning in an attempt to disrupt management accessing that building. We can talk about how successful or what that was. But another kind of struggle, so to speak, that GSN has kind of been attempting to kind of show solidarity to the Cops of Campus movement, which really kind of grew ahead of steam after the kind of eviction of occupation at ULU. And I think this struggle we wanted to really draw a connection with the kind of wider political realities that were happening at the same time, and make a student campus issue more connected to a much broader issue with kind of police violence and that affects, it's not just students who are affected by this, it's poor communities who are affected by it on a daily basis. We wanted to make that connection. It's something that I think GSN, Goldsmiths Solidarity Network, does and should be really continuing to do when it comes to these campus issues, is connecting them to wider issues, and then offering solidarity to those other movements that it's kind of connected to. And that Cops of Campus, there was a demonstration which we were at. Again, we can talk about the effectiveness of something like that. GSN has also been kind of supporting the campaign to get a student on the remunerations committee, which means that it's the board that decides pay for management, and there's no student or staff representative on that board. It's claims to be an independent board of people who are kind of picked from a supposedly diverse group of people, but it's a committee that has, what's the right word? That's what I suppose. A number of kind of people with vested interest in maybe kind of allowing senior management team to have incredibly high disproportionate wages, and we've also been supporting a movement started by the student union to get a student onto that committee. Another thing that's very in the kind of embryonic stage is an attempt to map the power structure of the university, and that's, like I say, in early days, but it's in its current form been about using Freedom of Information Act to kind of get information released from the university about answers to a series of questions, which is a time-consuming process, but hopefully be a fruitful one if we could effectively map and better understand the way the university is run and structured. That may serve us better in the future, kind of on-campus struggles. So I think that those kind of 4 issues, or 3 issues like that, fourth kind of undertaking has been the kind of main bulk of what GSM has been doing in the last year. So do we want to kind of give everyone the opportunity to introduce themselves? And then, yeah. So like I say, I'm Warren, and I'm studying Arts and Politics, MA in the Politics department, and I've been involved with GSM for about a year.
My name is Mariska, and I'm doing the MA Cultural Studies, and I'm not involved in any activism.
My name is Maria, and I'm doing the MA in Cultural Studies, and I'm not involved in any activism.
My name is Ruth. I'm doing a PhD in cultural studies, and I'm new in campus, so I'm not getting
I'm Ollie. I'm also new in town. I moved here 3 days ago. And I've just finished my MA in history at the University of Auckland.
I'm Mary, and I'm doing my MA in Cultural Studies. I've been trying to be involved in activism this year, but it's, yeah. There's been a lot of other stuff on. I like to be more involved, and this is cool.
I'm Paul. I do cultural studies as well. I was involved in GSM.
My name's Ash. I'm also doing cultural studies part-time. I've done some stuff with GSM too. Yeah, that's it.
My name's James. I've been a tiny bit involved in GSM, but not as much as I'd like to be. I'm studying MA applied anthropology, so not cultural studies. But and my particular interest is working with the local community and making the crossover and using Goldsmiths, actually using it to its full extent as a hub for generating solidarity throughout the whole of New Cross. So that's my particular interest in it.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm holding an update from us. It's kind of involved with the tutors strike in the art department, but outside of that, I'm CJ.
Hi, I'm Sam. I've just dropped out of an art degree, so I'm not doing anything at the moment. But I'm kind of interested in like running communities, particularly like queer communities and like create spaces, but like queer spaces. So that's what I'm.
My name is Theo, cultural studies MA student, and except annoying virtually every single person I know with my past involvement in the Quebec student movement, I've been absolutely useless, activism-wise.
My name is Cynthia, and I was at CCS last year, and currently I'm now involved in University of New York Port, and I was partially involved in GSM.
My name is Thomas, and I'm doing an MA in Cultural Studies. I've been a little bit involved in the GSM network, but not as much as I'd like. Especially for the past couple of months, we've been busy with other stuff. Yeah.
I'm Daniel, CCS PhD. I've been involved with GSM a little bit.
I'm Rebecca. I'm doing MA Cultural Studies, and I've been very minimally involved in GSM, and even more minimally involved in 3 courses.
I'm Natalie. I'm also doing my MA in Cultural Studies, and my interest tuition fees that were hiked up. So I'd like to think about ways that we can organise around that.
I'm Desmond, I'm doing my PhD here. Several years ago, a little bit involved in at that time the campaign that is hostile to the UKBA is hostile to international students.
Ramon, PhD in cultural studies. And in the past, I've been involved with activism and awareness for LGBT homelessness in the States. It's my first exposure to solidarity on campus.
My name is Luana. I'm doing a cultural studies PhD too. I've been involved for a lot of years in housing movement and squatting movement back in Italy. Ever since I came to Goldsmiths, which is 1 year ago, I've been involved in the Revolutionary Communist Group campaigns against landlord tax and for social housing. Not been doing anything on campus. Met some people of the trade union, of the trade union, of the student union, and yeah, kind of escaped the campus. Yeah, that's it.
Hi, I'm Athanasius. I'm a visitor here. I will study the MA Art and Politics from September on. So I'm new here. I don't have anything to say.
Philip, MA in Postcolonial Culture and Global Policy. Past and present mostly related to some leftist bubbles in Berlin. And I think there's the first GSM meeting I'm attending in August.
Alright, so we've got a pretty broad spread of interests.
Sorry. I'm actually an imposter. I teach at San Francisco State University the history of ideas, and only in London for several weeks. It's taken me a day and a half to find this campus and this building because I'm staying near Russell Square and saw the notice at the University of London buildings there, and no one. I mean, it's taken me this long to find you, so I'm delighted. Many of my colleagues in my interdisciplinary department do cultural studies. I am very interested in the difference between the methodology of study for cultural studies, which seems to me more sociological than what I've been doing for many years, which is textual analysis and the study of primary sources. But I'm certainly interested politically in the political aims and grounds of cultural studies. So I just wanted to learn more about, especially the methodological differences.
I've already had my turn, so.
I guess first of all, does anybody have any questions in particular about what we said in the opening? Does anybody wants clarification on something or has a question about something in particular? We're going to try to incorporate what people have said in terms of their interests into the discussion as far as possible. I'm going to spend a little bit of time not talking about the wider context of campus struggles, and then go into a bit more detail about what we've been doing in particular. And we're kind of hoping that a lot of the themes that have kind of come up in terms of this contradiction between, or not a contradiction necessarily, but this kind of, these two sort of streams of whether to kind of focus on the university as a workplace or whether to focus on kind of the emancipatory potential of education or whether to focus on how to bring university resources into wider struggles, which we'll hopefully be able to touch on through discussing kind of the stuff that we've actually been doing. But yeah, first off, are there any questions or comments or anything they'd like to put out there at this point?
I would like to ask, since understand more or less how you were, where you initiated this work. So it was about solidarity towards foreign students. So how do you finance yourself? How do you fund yourself? I mean, or do you need funds for anything? I mean, maybe you don't, it's just sort of self-organized, self-managed and everything. And yeah, how would you locate yourself in, you know, in sort of in relation to the union? So why does this solidarity sort of network is not inside the union? Although I totally don't understand what the union here is, but whatever. Yeah, I kind of, I think I already sort of expressed a little bit of problematicity of a union being paid by the university. So
do you mean the student?
Yeah, the student union. So yeah, it's probably me not knowing the geopolitics of Goldsmiths. So yeah, that's why I'm just, instead of wondering, you know, trying to place, you just place yourself.
Members of the student union are really involved with GSM, like Howard and so.
Yeah.
I mean, the president of the student union is a prominent member of GSM, like Paul. So I don't know.
Okay, so why isn't it the same thing? You know, why don't you have like a, why are you part of the union then?
I would say, well, I mean, we sort of are in the sense that we are registered as a society on campus as well. But I think and I haven't been in this country terribly long with this, so I don't know the ins and outs of the history of it, but my impression is that the student union has sort of two main functions, one of which is to organize student extracurricular activities like sports teams, that kind of stuff. That takes up a lot of its time. The other half is kind of very much a representative function in the student body, doing individual casework and so on and so forth, with full-time staff dedicated to that. And essentially, part of the impetus behind this is that we feel that we'd kind of like to operate not entirely outside the representative organs that are available, but but to have a kind of critical distance to them at the same time. I mean, the student union, I mean, to some extent, like unions in general, they have this kind of function of representation rather than kind of direct struggle, I guess. And we sort of felt that it would be good to at least, maintain a certain distance from it. Like, it has a particular bureaucratic function on campus, which is not a negative thing in and of itself, but that we don't necessarily want to pour all our energies into that way of doing politics, but keep it slightly open. Does that make sense?
And to answer the question about funding, it's not something that's needed or necessarily desired. The organisation, stuff we've done has been, we've been able to use the union's resources for printing, so those sorts of costs have been kind of minimal, if any. I wasn't around when GSM kind of came to be, but I think also there's important that from my perspective that there are there were maybe a dominance of particular kind of socialist groups on campus, and there was a need for the space away from the union not to be totally dominated by that, and to offer a kind of another alternative kind of network of solidarity that was actually interested in kind of positive approach to those sorts of actions. So it's worth noting.
Yeah, I've also a question. It's also perhaps it will also touch on the current situation or even the future about the whole movement atmosphere on campuses. So among people involved in the solidarity network, how many home and youth students and how many international students?
It's often a bit hard to tell.
I mean percentage is. Oh, because okay, perhaps I clarify my point a little bit. Because for instance, I'm talking about a few years ago when the budget cut is on camp was the ongoing issues, and you many international students also took to the demo and outside Whitehall. But for instance, in after the budget cuts and especially international MA students here just 1 year and with little knowledge about all the budget cuts, and it's very, very hostile towards the staff strike, which did not happen a few years ago.
I mean, it's generally something that we were discussing before we came, that it's generally it's kind of a challenging work. I mean, to a large extent, Goldsmiths Solidarity Network is predominantly CCS MA students, to a large extent, which is kind of a problem because you get this very transient group of people, right? And that also you're completely reliant on, I mean, the kind of rhythms of university life as well, which management is obviously very aware of. So they often wait until exam time to make particularly controversial announcements, for example, because they know they're not always going to be doing anything. I mean, there is a sort of palpable sense of frustration that because of the transience, it's difficult to build lasting presence. It's also hard to break out of the kind of the pre-existing social networks that are there. So, I mean, I'd say, like, sort of proportion-wise, I think we're probably about 50-50 international and home students. But but at the same time, we do have this issue that I feel there's a lot of students that we're not managing to get in touch with, that are not managing to get in touch with us for whatever reason. And this is definitely a problem that I think in other organizational contexts where you've got more time and space to build something to last over time, it would possibly be easier to develop an ongoing kind of way of engaging with people about that.
I think it's when we were speaking kind of in preparation for the workshop, one of the kind of the things that I expressed is that one of the things we need to be better at as a group, as a solidarity network, is expanding the amount of people we can come into contact with, and also encouraging those who are not going to be studying necessarily on campus next year to remain involved. And if we can be in a position next year where we have MA students or BA students who are kind of leaving the campus but still having the desire to be involved, we've had some level of success. But that is difficult because, you know, I myself very soon I won't be a student at Goldsmiths anymore, and I've had, so, you know, personally I may continue my involvement, but for a lot of people isn't an option, especially if they have, like say, an international student or student visa.
I think you're very, very welcome to get involved.
Personally, I think that one of the ways, because that's always been a big problem, like how do you build like a solid group? But if you, I mean, at least like from my experience, previously when moving to London, I mean, a long time ago, I was quite involved in other activists in Italy, and it's always been really hard for every student movement like to generate like a strong and continuous. I don't know, there were lots of questions around that continuity, political action, because you know, you're a student most of the time for like a limited amount of time, and so then in many cases there is a problem of legitimacy. So why are you doing this? Whom are you doing this for? How do you position yourselves to work towards certain struggles or towards others? And I think the one good thing about GSN, at least for what I've been seeing in the last few months, is that there's this attempt to, you know, yeah, this comes from Goldsmiths, but much more, at least this is my perspective of it, and I may be wrong, but at least it's more for, because it is a group of people that met and let's say they found themselves like on the same vibe, and also they found some sort of like material circumstances that allowed them to meet. And those material circumstances were in Goldsmiths, and not just generically at Goldsmiths, but at CCS, because there was space available where people could just like swipe their card in, or they had friends that could swipe them in. And so there is this like, but that means that GSN has also the potential to position itself as an interface between student-based struggle and university-related struggles, and also expand them towards larger struggles that obviously student struggles are located within. And I think that that is also due to the fact that, I mean, if I think about it, yeah, 50 from international students and European students, but then at the same time, like 50 between people that are students and people that aren't. Because I started being part of GSN that I had just graduated. So, yeah. So I think that there is that other aspect, the one of like being in between, and I think that there is a lot of potential in that, because that can be a way of, you know, giving continuity. And obviously the problem with international students is not, I mean, that's the problem in UKPA, people cannot stay. That's the point, you know.
Just as another quick comment to that last point is also, this is one of the things that at least I felt quite aware of, is that because, for whatever reason, because of limited capacity, lack of organization, lack of resources, so on, we're often unable to provide the kind of solidarity that we would like practically. And I mean particularly here things like migrant struggles and UKBA presence on campus is something which is this enormous monstrosity. UKBA is the United Kingdom Border Agency. So, yeah, I mean, and this is kind of the issue that I'm kind of attempting to offer this kind of solidarity, but not quite having the capacity to necessarily always follow through as far as we'd like to. The experiences from the year before when we were trying to help out with individual casework for students facing UKBA issues was overwhelmingly, with sort of facing these issues was overwhelmingly that we couldn't do much besides be friendly and supportive. That was kind of as far as it stretched. So there's definitely, and I think obviously the best way to get people involved is if you can actually offer concrete practical solidarity, which as long as you're not really able to do that, it's always going to be a struggle to actually kickstart it. I'd like to speak a little bit or open a discussion about the where we sort of find it, where the sort of the student movement, which is a term that I'm not sure I like that much, but sort of the student movement and where it sort of is in relation to a few years ago, because as many of you will be aware, in 2010, when the fee increases were first introduced, really dramatic, brutal fee increases, but not only fee increases for university degrees, but also the scrapping of EMA, which is Education Maintenance Allowance, which is a small bursary that the state would pay to high school students to enable them to continue their education. It was also gotten rid of, and kind of this general situation where there's been this fairly sustained attack on education as a public service and as a kind of autonomous social sphere as well. And the initial response to this in 2010 was really large-scale demonstrations, often quite militant mass action, which was generally kind of outside of the control of the National Union of Students, which is the formal student, it's like the Confederation of Student Unions. And I remember, like, you've been involved in the Quebec student movement, we had someone come over from CLUS, which is the sort of, not the NUS, or like the NUS, but way, 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 way better. And someone from CLUS came over to speak at Goldsmiths, and he said that the 2010 student uprising in London had been a big inspiration to them, and that he was surprised to see how depressed everyone was when he arrived here in 2013. And this was kind of my experience a little bit as well, that there's been a kind of, because this movement essentially did fail and was repressed, I mean, not to overstate the case, but repressed quite heavily in terms of fines and police violence as well. That there's been a kind of, on the one hand, there's been a kind of general demobilization of student demands and education struggles. However, I think what we're seeing nowadays on campuses, I'll mention a bit of the things that I mean, but one of the things that we're kind of seeing is that things have clearly been happening. So, for instance, when we occupied here at Goldsmiths, as part of the industrial student, there was a total of 10 other occupations around the country at the same time that hadn't been coordinated or pre-planned or anything like that, which, at least to me, suggests that there is a more kind of low-key, molecular, and localized kind of struggles going on at universities. And in particular, I think at Sussex, there has been really long and sustained struggles and really militant and long-term occupations of particularly conference facilities on campus, which I think obviously is like a direct kind of attack on the university's capacity to generate profit, which has been, these occupations have been organized against outsourcing in particular, and I think this is kind of a recurring theme that has been coming up now, that rather than being focused on fees or sort of larger sets of government legislation, a lot of the struggles have been specifically about outsourcing and paying conditions for staff more locally. So the Sussex occupations are one example of that. There's been the Chess Buses campaign that Rebecca mentioned as well, which is a campaign by migrant cleaners at University of London campuses, which has actually received fairly significant student support in a lot of places, which has been really positive. And so what I would kind of argue is that there's been a kind of a shift, which I think ultimately is quite positive. There's been kind of a shift away from large-scale and sort of more spectacular organizations towards a kind of more gradual process of building social relations on campus between staff and students. And it's kind of a theme for discussion that I think we kind of put out there as kind of what are the differences between now and 2010? Is the fact that we're no longer having big marches around central London to listen to Tony Benn, may he rest in peace, but rather a more kind of localized and what would be the word? A kind of a localized and more incremental kind of approach to building counterpower on campuses gradually. Is that kind of a description that people sort of feel is more or less in line with their experiences? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing?
I have a question, which I may have asked already in other instances, but I wonder how, like, this is just, I'm just lacking information, I guess, in this. How lasting do you think it is? Because you were talking about like the relationship between staff and students and whoever like is involved in university-related struggles. How lasting do you see these relations be, like, and how strong these relations are with professors? Because, for example, one of the more recent announcement that was spread was the fact that there's going to be a cut on tutoring positions. That was a way for non-founded PhD students to get a job, pretty much. And now it looks like in some departments, these positions will be part of the PhD training. And one of the things that, was a little bit strange to me, or maybe I just, missed it, was the fact that no professor spoke out loud for that. And I'm talking about full professors or even assistant professors, researchers, people that have a stable job within whatever department. So what their position is and what, so how lasting is these relationships that are being built? Because I don't see them that strong, or maybe we're just not that here yet.
But I think you were talking as well about not just academic stuff, but like because, for instance, that is solidarity between us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how much involvement academics generally have with this kind of stuff. They only just Ghana, as it turns out, but it's not really. I don't know. It seems like a lot of the time the professors are just happy in their tenured jobs, and they give pay lip service, but they're not really. I don't know if we've built any genuine relationships with professors. I can't really think of many examples of actual involvement in activism, especially in the last year, of active involvement in activism by professors, apart from like the odd radical who would be involved anyway, whether or not things were built. I think it's far more exciting, about the solidarity with non-academic stuff, because as we put
like, you know, the whole concept of apathy in itself is kind of like not that helpful, because it's just like, you're lazy, no, you're lazy, like, and then everyone just feels guilty, and then like they don't do anything. And like, maybe it's like useful to look at the way academics are like squeezed in their daily lives. Like, they don't have time. Like, it seems like they spend half their time doing admin, and they like don't have any time. I mean, yeah, like, I think that's a big part of it. But then also, maybe like it's helpful to look at it in terms of like, where is the hope in the situation? Like, I guess in response to your point about how, you know, there were those massive marches, and like that was everywhere for a few years, and then like what came out of it, like maybe it's kind of like a point at which we realize that the state or the public, whoever that is, media, I suppose, don't care about marching anymore. And like, maybe that's what, you know, a lot of people feel as well. And so like, yeah, there's a lack of...
I mean, the public seemed to go on marching. There was like 50,000 strong march recently, which like...
Yeah,
but like...
I mean, like...
They told the police beforehand it was a bit better than it is, but...
Yeah, I mean, it's cool, but is it disruptive?
No, it's not. It's entirely reified, yeah. But I think that's good. That means it's good that like there's been a move towards more macrocosmic action, because these big marches don't do anything.
Or maybe they're just like part of like a different, you know, it's like, I don't see these like two elements separated. Like they just, you know, they just belong to the same, I don't know, the same cloth.
I think they
right
did,
now.
but like now I don't think any.
I mean, I think what I'm trying to say is that like those big marches, like they did something within the extent that now we're talking about that, and you know, within the extent that many people were part of those marches, and then after a while, it seemed that that just wasn't a viable strategy anymore, and so maybe right now there are other strategies and there are other things to do. I mean, I agree totally with the fact that, you know, I think it's positive, the fact that it's interesting and probably more productive, the fact that there are like microstructures or more, I don't know, localized stuff.
I think the key is that in order for anything to happen, any individual campus needs to be a community on which solidarity can be generated through. As community first, and then a community that can take solidarity on the incremental type stuff, but also organise itself to do something in central London or whatever, if that's necessary or if that's appropriate for whatever the issue is. But building a community within the campus, I think that actually the stuff around the visiting tutors and that kind of change is interesting for a number of points, because it's people that have a long-term relationship with it. They're not just one-year master's students. They probably like to have a long-term relationship, but maybe they won't get a chance to. So, and also, I think increasingly large numbers of people at the university have some serious element of precarity in terms of their existence, whether it's visa stuff, boards, the way they're paid, or the fact that they're having to take out loans to study. I think precarity, and that gets, and like, I think, like you were saying, it goes right up. You know, even those people who are right at the top, who have a certain sense of stability, they're not doing what they signed up for. They're not doing what they wanted to do. They're being assessed on everything. They're being inspected and having to fulfil tick box exercises and all that. Everybody is feeling some type of pressure or precarity, and if we can link that together by seeing that they're all coming from the same place, which they are, then I think that we can start to build a community of people who are connected to the university, and that can be the base on which other things can happen.
I think the idea of who's connected to the university is essential that the idea expand, because there are these sort of subtle nuances of this process, like Mary said. saying, these sort of microaggressions come on many different levels. And so, you know, I agree that it's not as productive as saying, you know, like a lot of solidarity networks say it's us against them, and then you have to apply for entrance into our solidarity. You know, because, you know, especially when we consider different levels at the university. I mean, the professors are going through their own aggressions from the university, particularly when you consider that there are departments now at this university that have too few students for the number of professors. And we all know what that means. Now they're clamoring for jobs. So they have their own particular set of aggressions, and students have their own particular set of aggressions, and administration has their own particular set of aggressions, and obviously the management does as well. But one thought that is perhaps very provocative, and why it's essential that the idea of connection goes out into the community of non-students is, and perhaps this is a very naive and basic statement, but isn't it expected of a student to protest? I mean, it's almost more shocking the other way around. It's almost more shocking to see a student not drinking and drinking. You know what I'm saying? Like and so when you deal with the public perception of that, it's easy to take for granted this student movement because they're just students. They're just doing something. They're just transient on their way to this sort of concept of real life, and not really this perception of this is real life and a real experience. And these aggressions are just mirrored in other places of society. So I think it's particularly important to see that the aggressions that students face are the same aggressions that communities face, just in a different face. And I think that's why it's essential that these networks sort of expand understanding. But my last point is, but I feel as if these networks have to reach out with a general empathy as well. We can't punish other people for having their lived experience with the struggle. There are common connections that they could connect with, and by approaching a situation a priori, by assuming that they have no connection, perhaps severs links that could potentially be there. And that's, you know, maybe that's perhaps why, you know, one of the contributing factors that you see this sort of eruption, you know, this eruption that happened with the student movement is the same eruption that happened with community riots and community violence that erupts. It's this huge intensity. You get this rhetoric that suppresses it, these violences that suppress it, and it sort of like neutralizes back into the community, into a general sense of, you know, this perception of apathy. But those connections never really died. What made those eruptions happen, that never really dies. It's all about sort of intensifying them at the right moments and with the right ideas and the right language, because the people with the ability to enact this sense of power and aggression, they speak the right language. That's how they're able to do this. You know, that's how they're able to enact border agency policies that do these aggressions, because they're speaking the right language. And we, as a solidarity of students, need to start speaking multiple languages and not just our own, because a lot of people don't understand the language we speak on this campus.
That's probably a good point. It's probably a good point to move on to one of the, I think one of the campaigns that we were involved in the last year, which I think touches on a lot of points that were raised. Unfortunately, there's a lot we could talk about as well, but we also kind of stuff. But I mean, I'd like to talk a little bit about the experience of Corps on campus last year, because I think it really touches on particularly this issue of how far do these networks spread, to what extent are these issues the same. So for context, what happened was basically over the course of the industrial dispute, and there were these 10 occupations, the last one, which was at the University of London, in Bloomsbury, at Seventh House, it was evicted quite violently. And there had been a kind of pre-planned demonstration against the police on campuses already called by a group called the Invisible Party, I think. But basically, because of what happened in South House, there was a lot more of it. So on the night after the occupation, there were maybe a few hundred of us there, kind of running around Bloomsbury, more or less running away from the police around Bloomsbury. But and a few people got arrested, and then a week or two later, there was a larger student demonstration in Bloomsbury against police presence, at which the police took a very standoffish kind of approach, unlike the smaller one. They took a very, very standoffish approach, and then students marched to the Mark Duggan inquest. And there was generally at least a lot of chants pertaining to other instances of police violence, like Mark Duggan, Smiley and other victims of police brutality. However, I felt, and Goldsmiths Solidarity Network, we put out a statement kind of trying to make those corrections a little bit, and trying to say that, look, this is obviously significant, and the cops off campus issue, I think it's important to bear in mind, doesn't only pertain to kind of police repressing activism, but I mean, the student union president last year, like the actual student union president was shut down a flight of stairs by police, like in sort of rather than stop. So police on campus do actually make, particularly black and minority students feel less safe rather than more safe. And so we do have the student union has an official position we don't want in London. It's not just because of the kind of political pressure, but the kind of day-to-day harassment that students face as well. However, when you get this kind of issue, that I'm concerned that there was a certain narcissism to the cops off campus thing, in the sense that it was in the midst of the Duggan inquest, and yes, there's kind of token attention paid to that, people chanting and so on and so forth, but like, this doesn't actually translate into real student engagement. Like the United Friends and Families campaign, which has an annual march, which is never attended by students, it's never attended by anyone on kind of the political left either, it's like a completely ignored thing that was going on in the midst of the cops on campus thing, and again, it was not attended by anybody. And so I guess this issue, and then at the same time, I feel like the enthusiasm and the kind of zeal with which students and student activists took on the cops off campus thing was kind of almost a barrier to actual participation by other groups or to make connections, simply because it seemed so just not very reflective about it. I think there can be something a bit downright insensitive about taking on an issue like that so bluntly.
Isn't there a certain level of schizophrenia to the student activists? Because coming from the protest, you go to the financial office to pay your fees. And then depending on how you interact with the protest, you're already registered with the police, which sort of unravels the whole cycle. It's not a typical resistance sort of situation. Especially when you think of like the community level, because there are all these facets. You're basically paying the university for the right to protest it, and that complicates, that complicates the entire issue, and especially since the point of entry of the internet, particularly the international student, is a point of entry from Heathrow. By the time they get to your flyer, it's too late. The aggression is already been nailed down, which basically means you comply, you don't comply, you go home. And so I think that is a general, maybe it's just my personal opinion, but I think that's a general tension in especially students' ability to see how they can participate. And in what ways they can participate, because all they hear from the university is you have 7 days to register with the police. And here's this process that you must abide by, and if you don't abide by this process, don't bother registering for courses. That's all they hear. So how does that translate with their ability to go out and resist? I think that's a disconnection there with that.
I think one of the things when we've been through the process of preparing for this, being reflective on what we've done in the last year, I think one of the things we've kind of come across with a lot of our engagements has been the sense that too easily, sometimes we get, by supporting certain struggles or supporting certain groups, and this particularly within the industrial action, get caught into a dialogue. I feel that to sustain the current structure of the university. And I think something that this kind of student movement, student activism movement, or activists as a whole need to be better at is being critical of the way they're engaging with with struggles, and trying to look forward as far as they can at the implications of those engagements, and whether or not it's truly disruptive or resistant, and how far down the road until it is, you know, it only just loops back, like you say, underlines the previous or kind of future actions. I think particularly with because we were so closely supporting the UCU, the Teachers Union, which is something that I think we were right to do, but a problem that arose from it is that we got caught into the idea of sustaining the university in its current form and not being able to push the conversation around education beyond this kind of current form. And I think as like the group we are, we can have the potential to make those leaps better than the student union can. And that's something that we, as a group or as an extended kind of network of kind of activists need to be aware of. Is that a good jumping off point for the next part of the... The other thing we wanted to do was to give an opportunity to, a brief opportunity to change the perspective, and rather than, because we have been looking back at what has happened, and you know, to offer opportunity for people to discuss and put forward kind of approaches or kind of positions that we can maybe move forward. We can look forward and what maybe could happen in the following following year or months or so I think that what I was just saying, that kind of need to have a wider kind of perspective and greater understanding of the kind of what actual impact certain actions will have is something that a group like GSM needs to do more widely. And I think that mapping of the power structure of the university will be one facet of making us better at that.
I have a question actually. Well, quite a few of my friends are international students, as I am. So when the industrial actions took place, some felt very kind of frustrated by this. You know, it's like they are infringing our, right to get access to the facilities and, get educated. And actually, some of them don't know why this industrial action take place so frequently, like 3 times in 2 semesters. And actually, someone said, you guys should, ask for compensation for this, because you have paid so high in tuition fee for that, and so
yeah,
I think
we
are not informed very well.
Yeah, no, I think that is definitely the case, and I think the university was able to control the narrative and make students, particularly those who are here for such a short amount of time paying incredibly high fees, to feel that our hands are tied, we can't do anything about it. This is purely the staff's fault. You should blame them. And what we were kind of very strongly saying is that that's not true. The staff's claims to desire for a fair rate of pay was one that the student body should support by not accessing the resources for the day. And if we want energies for complaint or kind of attempts to kind of reclaim compensation should be aimed at senior management, and that's something we, as a group, we were trying to encourage. So yeah, the strike action, you can question the kind of how effective it is, but
actually, any positive response from the university or any raising salary?
The university isn't going to apologise because they don't think it's their fault. But I guess this isn't the conversation the conversation I think we should now have for the last kind of 10-15 minutes of today is to talk about kind of things we should maybe go forward. We could discuss how we approach future strike action. How do we want to do that?
So it's lunch break after this, so if you want to talk about it more, we can. Yeah, that's what I think it's really important.
Yeah, I also want to follow her point because I read this. Well, I've been here for 4 years, so I definitely know what's happening. But I think for the leaflets from not only the Solidarity Network, but also from many students' bodies supporting the strike, it somehow failed to contextualize fails to contextualize the whole issues with the whole budget cuts, with students, no matter home students or international students, becoming the cash cow. Because this statement, I think, is quite strong during the 2010 when the condemned government wants to do budget cuts and how to get the international students involved. At that time, it's very contextualized. That okay, we all become the cash cow, and now the budget cuts affect everyone. But it seems that as now okay, haven't, especially for new arriving international students, having known the fact that gosh, the fees has become increasingly and the so-called service delivered has become poorer and poorer, is because the budget cuts. And if this does not contextualize, will end up, well, it's just again, why strike?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think something we were trying to do, as a sort of network, was contextualise the pay dispute in the wider privatisation of the university, and saw the support for the strikes as the beginning of an attempt to kind of push back against that privatisation. And we wanted to, maybe not successfully, but we weren't successful in opening a dialogue about what students wanted their university to be like and how they wanted it to operate. And I think that's something we would be taking forward into the following year.
But taking forward, that's why I think it's in the message, this contextualization of it, because you have international students coming in paying £12,000 in fees. They know that partial of those fees are going to the professors, so why would they support a professor getting more money?
Yeah, no.
It was more the way that it highlighted the fact that, like, what is it? Pat Lowry gets, was it
9 times?
Nine times.
No,
but
that's
money is mainly going to senior management rather than lectures.
Right, but that's part of the narrative that happens retrospectively. Once they actually get into Heathrow, this is already known. So, and these dynamics, of course, it's a giant dynamic, but that's also at a certain sense, it's also common knowledge. I know the CEO is getting more than the person cleaning the hallways. I know that there's a disparity between the vice chancellor and the professor that's there. What I don't know for an international student is how do you translate that into their lived experience enough to get them to uprise. We already know these things happen.
I think people are quite shocked by the disparity between in a university. I think
we're shocked by all kinds of disparities.
Yeah, I mean, in the university especially in the England.
But the point isn't to shock people by the disparity. The point is to shock people enough to the point where they're willing to actively do something. And the only way they actively do something is if you translate that into their lived experience. I think that's the essential part. I'm not saying that that's not an issue. I'm not saying it's not shocking. What I'm saying is, how do you translate, I can't go to the library, how do you translate that into the chancellor's salary? That's the thing.
The union management, they translate it.
They translate it, yeah, exactly.
Well, I want to go on a slightly different track, so if anybody is responding to that, jump in. But because I wanted to go back to sort of overall strategy, and I personally believe that it's too easy for a student organisation like GSN to be focused on student issues and to kind of get into a bit of an inward-looking spiral. I think the key thing is for it to focus on issues of importance and then find the student angle on it. So it's kind of the other way around, really. So issues of importance might be living wages or inequality of wages or fair pay or whatever, and then to find, so that's actually the campaign, that's actually the issue. And then we say, well, how this plays out in things that we're used to are X, Y, and Z. So I think it's very easy for the Cotswold campus is a good example. You know, nobody who's interested in police violence against people is, well, violence against students is like pretty way down the list of, not very funny, it probably is not even on the list, possibly. So it does kind of look, I mean, Vincent said it quite well, it looks kind of a bit odd that everyone's suddenly getting excited about Cotswold campus, where frankly, you know, there's a lot worse. And also it looks a bit tokenistic when we do try and make the link. If you haven't set it up in that way first, there are campaigns that people could have got involved in for the long term about police violence in London, and that is to be done first rather than suddenly jumping on a student issue. So you've got to do your campaigns, decide what's important for the members of the group, big issues, and then decide how that relates to the people that you are trying to get involved. I think it's that way around. In practical terms, the difference is very small, but I think it's the attitude of it, helps you do better stuff.
I think also, the fact that news agents are reporting the violence against students at ULU, while kind of clearly ignoring, the actual violence happening on a daily basis. But I would also make the sense that students are also the victims of that violence on a day-to-day basis. We have, and that's, I think, that's the drive through on that issue.
I think you're right about
you get to the wider issue by talking to people's kind of actual experience of police violence. And I know growing up and vaguely near to New Cross that I was victim to that sort of violence, and I am now a student, so I can make that connection, and that can be done. I think also something I think we can also one of the big issues is the nature of kind of how our educational institutions work and are shaped, and I think as students we're well placed to talk about those things, and so I think that is something that, if you take a big issue, one that we are quite significantly better placed than maybe other people to maybe kind of talk about and kind of create kind of a change. I think maybe slightly in an attempt to talk to what you were saying earlier, about something that Vincent said, talk about free education as a practice, not as a demand, and make institutions within the university, create them so that students are able to access either education or kind of solidarity or kind of actual, what was the phrase I'm looking for? If they have complaints within the university but they don't want to access the university structure, then maybe we can begin to create institutions within the university that can help them in that way. And I think that's something that maybe we should, as a GSN or kind of a wider activist group, be thinking about, how we create those spaces within the institution that help to kind of actually achieve these things without having to rely on demanding them from senior management, because that is a one-way dialogue. We've kind of maybe proved, not proved, but kind of we've seen in the last years isn't the most effective use of time and won't actually lead to any grand change on the university campus.
Can I just say one thing? So I think that the importance in this is remembering the word network, and that it's not a group, it's not something that has a sort of physical mass to itself, so it does have this sort of influences coming in and out, especially with things like international students being faced with shut down parts of university and being angry about that, and it's not, it's not for something like GSN to provide an answer to that either. In this sort of horrific valorization of education that we currently live through, where we are all individualized, it does also have to come from, if an individual is that angry about it, then yeah, talk to someone, but it's not like someone else is not going to provide an answer to that anger. It can, that's where the kind of network, I guess, kind of comes in, that the more people are angry about it, which they are, through these sort of like reactive situations, the more it can come together. It can't, like, you know, so there is no sort of like failure of like one pamphlet of not explaining everything. It's just how, like, how do you address the fact that, like, yeah, there's like, we don't know a lot of stuff about anything in the world, and like we only get to that through our own sort of quest to discover it too, which hopefully forms more of a network in the end.
Yeah, well, I understand the whole concept of network is not the organization, but somehow if we still need to think about solidarity, there are at least something that if there are some situation that you already see that there might be a group of students which is potentially the allies and alienated or alienated or cannot, how to say, if they're your potential ally, but if you cannot translate the situation to let your potential ally understand, then you lose the potential ally, and it is not really good in the long solidarity campaign.
Sometimes I think that, like, you can't spend all your energy trying to convince people of something, though, especially through a leaflet. Like, we tried really, really hard to do this in Auckland, and we wrote so many leaflets, and we made so many posters, and we, like, plastered the uni, and we did, like, teach-ins all the time, and, like, there were always people that were angry about it, and like there are always going to be people that don't support you. But actually, I think the thing that ended up convincing most people was just direct action in itself. So like we did occupations, and then the police beat us up a bit, and then all of a sudden everyone agreed with us, and it was just like that's the most convincing thing in the end. Like people need to experience that, and that's like kind of how networks work, is that like, you know, you go to an actual protest and you sort of like, you know, become part of this like general feeling of like injustice, and then you like change. Like, yeah, I'm not saying don't make leaflets and don't like attempt to do these things. Like I totally think that we have to as well, but there's like a danger in fetishizing like communication, I think, because like communication is so endless and so hard as well.
And so effective. I'm sorry, of the 32% of people who voted in England, they were all influenced, majority of those were influenced by pamphlets and a message that connected with them at home that was fictitious and false, which is exactly what the university does when these protests come up. It's the professor's fault. It's a very simple message that's distributed via a very simple communication tool called email. Yeah. It's very direct, it's very succinct, and a neo-capital machine knows exactly how to use it. It affects us in our everyday lives. I'm not saying that it's about convincing someone, but what I'm saying is we can't take for granted that people are convinced all the time. Like, and that it's not a one-way thing. It's a multiple strategy. Obviously, this thing is taking multiple facets, but I don't think that we should just take for granted that that the messaging does matter.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, right now, like, the problem is that there is a tension between empathy and solidarity. So in this communication, it becomes like really, because before you mentioned the fact that, you know, there are like these points of connection and there are and there's like moments of like empathy between people that are, you know, sort of like obviously they face the same problems, just in different ways at different moments of their lives. But I think that really the point is like figuring out these moments of empathy, and that is where the communication goes through. That is where I think it is effective. I don't think that communication should be fetishized. I don't agree with you. But on the other side, I think that the problem is how we communicate and like figuring out the exact moment and way that
that communication establishes more than solidarity, empathy. The fact that, what is happening to you is or could happen to me very easily. Because, for example, before you guys were talking about the fact that people are like shocked of like a bit of disparity and between pays of different like people working in the same university and blah blah blah, and this is all known, and the point is like going beyond this. But the fact is that so how do we connect the material life of people to the wages, amount of money that a certain manager is paid? Well, the problem is that that connection becomes really difficult when the demographic of the students actually is changing, and when like that difference doesn't impact them at all. And the fact that that professor...
You can't take that for granted.
No, you can't. You can't. But it is a matter of fact that, especially for international students, like the demographic is changing. There's just few students can afford to pay. And so the point is probably not just trying to see how that, outrageous amount of money given to a certain manager affects the life of the students, but how it affects the life of potential students and non-students. So probably there is like an entrance of empathy that it just goes like in a different direction.
When I look at the retrospective of the property campaign in California, there were a lot of retrospectives on how all of a sudden you have legislation that legalizes gay marriage, and then all of a sudden, bam, just like that, the public supports the opposite. And the retrospective was, while the pro-gay rights campaign put up billboards of same-sex couples and happy, 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 what they realized is the Prop 8 supporters went door to door, and they laid out a checklist of here's how, if you vote for this, here's how it will affect your kids, your family. They created that point of empathy, which I believe is a very good when you're talking about you meet with students after they go to the board A. That is that point of connection of empathy, where you can make those solid connections by putting up something that says the chancellor makes $200,000 a year. Okay, well, so. Of course he does, but I want to know $200,000 a year equates to talk to me, have a dialogue. How does that equate to me? Okay, maybe I won't use the library. Actually, screw that. I'm not even going to use the library. I'm going to join the protest because this is how this directly affects my life.
I'm sure it's that the people who are actually teaching you get fuck all of what you paid. That affects your life. Because you're like,
of course it does. So, but when I'm talking about eruption, you can't. I mean, we're in a specific environment where we're talking about specific rights. I think it's kind of going. What I'm saying, what this gentleman's saying, is these issues are broader. There are tons of issues that need attention. There are tons of issues that need attention, and I think what we need to do subjectively is think about what makes us erupt in certain issues and not erupt in other issues. You can't just take for granted and say the world's unequal and I should just erupt everywhere, because subjectively that's just how we live our lives. Why am I not out? Why am I not protesting against the disparity for breast cancer research as opposed to prostate research? Why am I not out protesting community homelessness against this? It's not. I'm not trying to create a dialectics. You know what I'm saying? But what I'm trying to say is there's a reason why people join movements on specific things. They don't just wake up one day and like, bam, I'm going to join a student movement. There's a reason why these things happen.
I just feel obliged to interject that it's 1:30, so strictly speaking, it's lunchtime. And I do actually have to go. But I hope that we can continue the discussion with those of you that are going to be around in the future to get in touch and stuff as well.
Is there a kind of way to, how do you communicate? Oh, just
come back to me.
Okay. So emails?
Yeah. I mean, there's a Facebook group as well, but we try to do the actual proper communication via email rather than Facebook groups.
And GSN is due to have a meeting pretty soon, which still needs to be scheduled. Yeah, it has